Have you ever wondered if the animals you love continue to exist after death? The Bible has something shocking to say about this, something that most people have never heard before. What if I told you that the bond you share with your pets isn't just an earthly connection, but part of a much greater divine plan? What if everything you thought about animals and the afterlife was incomplete? Today, you're about to discover a biblical truth that will change the way you see your pets forever. Jesus Christ himself revealed something incredible about where animals go after they leave this world, and what I'm about to share with you will completely transform your understanding of God's plan. If you've ever lost a beloved pet, if you've ever felt that deep, aching pain of saying goodbye, then you cannot afford to miss this. Before we begin, I need to ask you something important. Many people watch our videos but aren't subscribed to the channel. If you believe in God's message and want to uncover more powerful biblical revelations like this, take a moment right now to subscribe. It's completely free, and by doing so, you ensure that you never miss another life-changing video. Stay with me until the very end, because what you'll learn today is not just information, it's spiritual awakening. You might never look at your pets the same way again. When an animal loves us, its affection is pure, steadfast, and eternal. It is an unwavering bond that mirrors the unconditional love God has for his children. But the question that lingers in the hearts of many is this: what happens to them after death? Is their existence truly extinguished, or is there a divine mystery beyond what we can see? The Christian faith teaches us that all of creation is under God's sovereign will, and nothing that he has fashioned with love is meaningless or without purpose. As we journey through the biblical truth, we uncover a reality far deeper than the earthly existence we know. The scriptures remind us in Ecclesiastes 3 verse 21, "Who knows if the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth?" A profound statement, indeed, for it invites us to seek God's message in this question, one that is rarely discussed yet holds immense significance. What if the answer is far more extraordinary than we ever imagined? In the silence of our hearts, many of us have felt the ache of losing a beloved pet, an animal that walked alongside us, offering comfort in our darkest moments. Their presence, though silent, spoke volumes, filling our lives with joy, companionship, and unwavering loyalty. And when they depart, the void they leave is real, almost as if a part of our soul has been taken with them. But can such love simply vanish? The gospel of Christ speaks of restoration, of a God's plan that is beyond human comprehension, one where love, pure and untainted, never fades into oblivion. Romans 8 verses 19 to 21 tells us that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. This passage reveals a truth that many overlook: God's work of redemption does not merely concern humanity, but all of creation. Could this mean that our loyal companions, those we have loved and who have loved us in return, also have a place in his grand design? The question is not just about animals, but about the faith in God that we hold onto in times of loss. If Jesus Christ, the embodiment of divine love, spoke of a kingdom where all things are made new, could it not include those innocent creatures who have never sinned, never betrayed, never harbored malice? Isaiah 11 verses 6 to 9 paints a picture of a future where the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. A vision of harmony, untouched by the corruption of this fallen world. Such a prophecy aligns with the Bible prophecy that speaks of God's intention to renew all things. Trust in Jesus means trusting in his perfect will, even in matters we do not fully understand. And in that trust, we find peace in knowing that love is never wasted in God's kingdom. Many have wondered whether animals possess souls, whether they are capable of an afterlife. While Scripture does not explicitly provide a detailed answer, it does give us glimpses of a greater reality. We know that animals are not judged as humans are, for they do not sin. They do not choose between good and evil, yet they reflect God's goodness in their innocence, their loyalty, their ability to love without condition. If God cares for the sparrows, Matthew 10 verse 29, how much more does He care for those creatures that have formed deep bonds with us? The idea of spiritual awakening is not limited to human beings alone. It is a revelation of the vastness of God's love. In the end, it is not about whether we can prove the existence of animals in the afterlife, but about whether we can trust in the boundless mercy of the Creator who made them. This truth is not often spoken of, yet it resides in the depths of every heart that has ever grieved the loss of a beloved pet. God's plan is one of restoration, of renewal, and of love that does not end with death. Perhaps the real question is not where animals go, but how we view them through the lens of faith. If we believe that God is just, merciful, and good, then we must also believe that He does not create love in vain. This is why today's revelation is so important, because it challenges us to expand our understanding of biblical truth, to embrace the possibility that nothing of true value is ever lost in the hands of God. So, let us embark on this journey together, seeking the wisdom of Jesus Christ, opening our hearts to what He has to reveal. What we discover may forever change how we see the bond between man and the creatures God has entrusted to us. At first, Lewis had no intention of keeping the puppy. He had rescued it, yes, but in his mind, it was a temporary arrangement. Just until it regained its strength. Just until he could find a shelter that would take it in. He told himself he wasn't in the right state of mind to care for another living being. He barely had the energy to take care of himself. But as the days passed, it became clear that this fragile creature had no intention of leaving his side. Its tiny body, once weak, slowly gained strength. And despite everything, despite the suffering it had endured, it clung to life with a resilience Lewis hadn't expected. There was something almost divine about that persistence, a silent reflection of Christian faith, the belief that even in suffering, there is hope. Faith in God tells us that sometimes, healing comes in ways we don't anticipate. Sometimes, it arrives in the form of an unexpected companion. But it wasn't easy. In fact, at first, it felt impossible. The puppy was loud, messy, and completely disruptive. It tore through the house, knocking things over, chewing on furniture, refusing to be tamed. Lewis found himself at his wits' end, overwhelmed by the constant chaos. He had spent months drowning in grief, longing for silence, and now that silence had been shattered. The more he tried to impose order, the more the puppy resisted. There were moments of frustration, moments when he questioned why he had ever picked up that cardboard box in the first place. But God's message often comes in unexpected ways. He teaches us patience through trials, love through challenges, and renewal through the very things that force us out of our comfort zones. Could it be that this little creature had been placed in his life for a reason far beyond what he could see? The biblical truth is that sometimes, what seems like an obstacle is actually a gift in disguise. Lewis didn't realize it at the time, but this small, energetic being was forcing him to re-engage with life. He could no longer sit passively in his sorrow. He had to move, had to pay attention, had to care. And slowly, so slowly he barely noticed, his heart began to shift. The puppy's joy was infectious. Its eagerness to explore, to play, to simply be alive, was a stark contrast to the heavy despair Lewis had been carrying. There is something sacred in the way animals live so fully in the present moment. They do not dwell on the past or fear the future. They simply exist, fully and freely, embracing life as it comes. Wasn't that the very essence of God's plan? Hadn't Jesus Christ himself called his followers to embrace the kingdom of God with the innocence of a child? One night, after another long and exhausting day, Lewis found himself watching the puppy sleep. Its tiny chest rose and fell steadily, its body curled up, safe and warm. And something in that quiet moment struck him. This creature had come into his life at a time when he had nothing left to give. He had been convinced that love was over, that his heart had closed itself off forever. And yet, here was love, staring him right in the face. Not in the grand, overwhelming form he had once known, but in something smaller, quieter, no less profound. Jesus Christ speaks often of love, not just love for God, but love for one another, love for the least of these, love that heals, love that restores. Could it be that love had found him again? That God's message was woven into the presence of this tiny being, this life that refused to give up, even after everything it had been through? It was then that he made a decision. No more shelters. No more plans to send the puppy away. If it had fought to survive, if it had clung to him through everything, then he would do the same. He would name it. He would claim it. And in doing so, he would allow himself to believe, just for a moment, that there was still hope. That his story wasn't over yet. He chose a name that carried weight, a name that spoke of survival, of second chances, of redemption. Noah. A name that symbolized deliverance through the storm, a name that echoed Bible prophecy and the promise of new beginnings. Because maybe, just maybe, this little creature wasn't just a pet. Maybe it was something more. Maybe it was a sign. A sign that even in the midst of grief, even when all seems lost, God's plan is still unfolding, waiting for us to open our eyes and see. Just as life was beginning to feel worthwhile again, just as Lewis was rediscovering small moments of peace, everything changed in an instant. It was a day like any other, the sun shining gently, the air crisp with the kind of quiet beauty that makes a person pause and breathe deeply. Noah trotted ahead of him, his tail wagging, his body full of the energy and joy that had once seemed impossible in Lewis's grief-stricken world. And then, everything shattered. In mere seconds, the peace he had started to embrace was ripped away. At a crosswalk, with no warning, two cars came speeding through, recklessly racing past a stopped vehicle. There was no time to react. No time to pull Noah back. The sound of tires screeching, the sickening impact, the sensation of his own body being thrown into the air. And then, darkness. Silence. Faith in God tells us that even in the darkest moments, He is near. But where was God now? Where was His protection, His mercy? The weight of nothingness pressed against him. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was absence, a void so deep that it felt as though he had been removed from everything he had ever known. And then, slowly, a warmth. A light. A presence beyond words. Jesus Christ stood before him, radiant, filled with peace so overwhelming that it dissolved every fear, every doubt, every sorrow. The Son of God, the Savior of the world, looking at him not with judgment, but with love. "Lewis," Jesus said, his voice steady, filled with an authority that calmed his soul. "Do not be afraid." And in that moment, Lewis realized he wasn't dead. He was somewhere else, somewhere beyond human understanding. Somewhere sacred. And Jesus had brought him there for a reason. God's plan was unfolding before him, and he was about to receive a revelation that would change everything. "There is something you must know," Jesus continued, his eyes piercing through to the very depths of Lewis's soul. "Something concerning both you and Noah." The words sent a shiver through him. Noah. The moment replayed in his mind, the helplessness, the impact, the leash snapping in his hand. Was Noah gone? Had he lost the very creature that had pulled him back from the abyss? But Jesus' gaze held him steady. "Noah was sent to you," he said. "That day, when you found him in that box, it was not by chance." Lewis's breath caught in his throat. Hadn't he wondered about that very thing? Hadn't he felt, deep down, that the timing of Noah's arrival in his life was too perfect to be mere coincidence? Biblical truth teaches us that nothing happens outside of God's will. And yet, hearing Jesus say it aloud made his entire soul tremble. The realization hit him like a wave. He and Noah had both been abandoned. both left to suffer, to face a world that no longer had a place for them. And yet, they had found each other. They had saved each other. You and Noah are two wounded souls, Jesus continued, his voice filled with something indescribable, compassion, certainty, divine authority. But you chose each other. You saved each other. The words burrowed deep into Lewis's heart. How many nights had he sat in silence, talking to Noah as though the dog could understand his grief? How many times had Noah simply rested his head on his lap, as if to say, I know. I see you. You are not alone. Was it possible that Noah had truly understood him? That their bond was more than just companionship, that it was something sacred? Trust in Jesus means trusting in the ways he speaks to us, even when we do not recognize his voice at first. Lewis's heart pounded as the weight of the revelation settled over him. He had thought he was the one who had saved Noah, but what if it had been the other way around? What if Noah had been God's message all along, a silent, steadfast presence sent to guide him back to life? Jesus' words carried the unmistakable ring of truth. Lewis, nothing that comes from God is ever lost. The words echoed deep within him, filling every broken part of his soul with hope. If Noah had been placed in his life for a reason, then surely that reason did not end in tragedy. Surely, God's plan had not reached its conclusion. Lewis's eyes filled with tears, his heart both aching and full of something he hadn't felt in a long time, certainty. Noah was more than just a dog. He was a piece of God's unfailing love, a testimony to the fact that even in the greatest sorrow, God never stops reaching for his children. Lewis stood before Jesus Christ, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and fear. The weight of his words lingered. Noah was sent to you. It was not chance. Not coincidence. But why? Why would God orchestrate something as seemingly insignificant as a man finding a stray puppy? The answer came not in explanations, but in something greater, a vision. Jesus raised his hand, and suddenly, Lewis was no longer standing in that divine presence. He was back in that cold afternoon, staring into a cardboard box, looking into Noah's tired, pleading eyes. But this time, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Pain. Not just the pain of hunger or cold, but a suffering that mirrored his own. Lewis had been drowning in grief, and so had Noah. Both abandoned, both broken, both searching for something, someone, to hold on to. Biblical truth teaches that God works in ways beyond our understanding. Had Noah been placed in his life not just to be saved, but to save him in return? You and Noah, Jesus continued, were both cast aside by the world. But God's plan does not discard what the world ignores. The words sent a shiver through him. How many times had he questioned his own worth after Aurora's death? How many times had he convinced himself that his best days were behind him, that love had no place in his future? And yet, Noah had been a constant reminder that love still existed. Not just any love, but pure, steadfast, unwavering love. The kind of love that reflects God's message in its simplest form. Had he been blind to it all this time? Had he overlooked the very thing that God had placed in front of him? The Christian faith tells us that love is the greatest commandment of all, Matthew 22 verses 36 to 40. And here he was, realizing that love had never left him. It had only changed form. Lewis's thoughts raced. But what does this mean? He looked up at Jesus, searching for an answer. And in response, Jesus spoke with a certainty that left no room for doubt. Noah was chosen for you. Lewis felt his chest tighten. Chosen? Could it really be? Could an ordinary dog, abandoned and left to die, be part of something so divine? A divine reminder that faith in God is not just about believing in the unseen, it's about recognizing His hand in the everyday miracles that unfold before us. Tears filled Lewis's eyes. He had spent so long searching for meaning in his suffering, questioning God's presence in his pain. And all along, the answer had been beside him. In Noah's unwavering loyalty. In his silent understanding. In the way he had pulled Lewis back from the brink without ever saying a word. It was then that Lewis finally saw the Bible prophecy of restoration, not just for himself, but for all of creation. God's plan was not just for humanity. It was for everything he had made. And nothing that was made in love would ever be lost. Noah's story is not over, Jesus said, his voice filled with reassurance. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lewis believed it. He trusted it. Because when God speaks, he speaks truth. And trust in Jesus means trusting that love, real, God-given love, never fades. As Lewis stood in the radiant presence of Jesus Christ, he felt a weight lifting from his soul, a burden he had carried for far too long. He had spent months believing that his love for Noah, the bond they had formed, was merely an earthly connection, something destined to fade like everything else in this temporary world. But now, standing before the Son of God, he saw things through a different lens. Nothing that comes from God is ever lost, Jesus said, his voice calm, steady, absolute. Those words resonated deep within him. Could it be? Could the love between man and animal hold eternal value in God's plan? The thought alone was overwhelming. The Christian faith teaches that love is divine, that it transcends the temporary, that it is the very essence of God himself, 1 John 4 verse 8. And if God had placed Noah in his life, could that love truly be destined to vanish? Then, as if reading his heart, Jesus lifted his hand, and suddenly, Lewis saw a new vision, a land unlike any he had ever imagined. The air was pure, the rivers gleamed with crystal clarity, and stretching far beyond his sight were endless meadows, untouched by suffering, unmarred by time. And there, in the midst of this paradise, he saw something that sent his heart racing. Animals. Not just wild creatures roaming free, but familiar ones, companions, friends, those who had walked with humanity through their earthly journey. He saw wolves resting beside lambs, lions lying at peace with children, horses galloping through golden fields. It was exactly as Bible prophecy had foretold in Isaiah 11 verse 6, creation, restored to its original harmony. And then, among them, Lewis saw him. Noah. Strong, healthy, his spirit unburdened by pain, his eyes filled with the same unshakable loyalty that had saved Lewis from his grief. God's message was clear, this was not the end. Tears welled in Lewis's eyes as he watched Noah move freely, his body full of the energy and joy he had once known. The dog that had been a symbol of his darkest days was now a reflection of God's plan, a reminder that nothing created in love is ever lost. Noah will be here, Jesus said, his voice filled with reassurance. Just as all those who have loved and been loved with pure hearts. The weight of those words was almost too much to bear. Was this truly possible? Had he misunderstood everything he had been taught? The gospel of Christ is clear. Human souls are judged, redeemed, and given a place in God's kingdom through faith. But what of the creatures who have never sinned, who have never strayed from their purpose? Romans 8 verses 19 to 21 had hinted at this truth all along, for the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed, that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay. Could it be that when all things are restored, animals, too, will have their place in God's renewed creation? Lewis turned to Jesus, his voice barely a whisper. Does this mean that every animal we have loved will return to us? The question felt almost too sacred to ask. But Jesus simply nodded. Not all, he said, for many are simply creatures of the earth, moving through life as they were designed. But those who have been part of your journey, those who have shared in love, will have a place by your side. For love is never wasted. That final statement struck something deep within Lewis. Love is never wasted. How often had he feared that love was fleeting, that it could be taken, that it could vanish with death. And yet, standing in the presence of Christ, he understood, love is eternal, because faith in God is eternal. Nothing truly loved is ever lost, because God himself is love. Lewis collapsed to his knees, overcome with gratitude, with revelation, with an understanding that had eluded him his entire life. The pain of Noah's loss still ached, but now it was different. Now, it carried hope. Not the desperate hope of a man clinging to an illusion, but the trust in Jesus that comes from seeing God's message with his own eyes. The light around him began to shift, the vision fading, the real world pulling him back. But before he returned, Jesus spoke one last time, "When you go back, share what you have seen." The world has forgotten the value of God's creatures. Remind them that every life is precious, and that every bond of love is a sacred gift. And with that, the light faded completely, and Lewis awoke to a reality that would never be the same again. Lewis gasped as his eyes fluttered open, the harsh reality of the world rushing back to him like a crashing wave. The warmth of Jesus Christ's presence had faded, replaced by the cold, unforgiving pavement beneath him. For a moment, he felt disoriented, his mind caught between two realms, the divine vision he had just witnessed and the brutal truth of the accident that had brought him here. But then, he remembered. Noah. His heart pounded as he forced his aching body to move, his vision still blurry from the impact. And there, just a few feet away, he saw him, his faithful companion, his seal of hope, lying motionless on the asphalt. A deep dread seized him, the kind that makes a person feel as if the ground beneath them has disappeared. Faith in God tells us that he is near in our suffering, but in this moment, all Lewis could feel was fear. Pain shot through his limbs as he crawled toward Noah, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The sight before him was heartbreaking. Noah's body was battered, his fur matted with blood, his breath shallow and labored. And yet, there was still life in him. His eyes, though weak, found Lewis's, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not despair, not fear, but something deeper. God's message had been clear. This bond was not meant to be broken. But now, Lewis was faced with the greatest test of all. Could he trust in what he had seen? Could he believe that Noah's story wasn't over, even when everything in front of him screamed otherwise? A sob broke from his lips as he cradled Noah in his arms, his entire being trembling from shock, grief, and the overwhelming weight of what he had just experienced. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, just stay." He didn't know if he was speaking to Noah or to God's plan itself. He had seen a glimpse of the eternal, had been given knowledge that most would never receive. And yet, here he was, face to face with suffering once more. Was this a test of faith? A moment where he had to choose between trusting in Jesus Christ's promise or giving in to the fear that clawed at his heart? The Christian faith is not just about believing in miracles, it is about holding on to them, even when the world tells you to let go. The wail of sirens in the distance barely registered as Lewis pressed his forehead to Noah's, silently praying, desperately pleading for God's plan to include more time. He knew that in the grand scheme of eternity, they would be reunited. That much had been made clear. But was it wrong to ask for just a little longer? For one more chance to cherish the gift he had been given? The thought of losing Noah now, after everything, was unbearable. And yet, something deep inside him, something beyond fear, beyond sorrow, whispered, "Trust in Jesus." Because God's message had not been one of despair, but of hope. And hope, real and unwavering, is what sets faith apart from doubt. The paramedics arrived, their voices distant, their movements swift. Hands pulled Lewis away, voices asked questions he couldn't process. But as they carefully lifted Noah onto a stretcher, one thing became clear: he was still fighting. Despite the odds, despite the pain, despite the tragedy, he was still here. And in that moment, Lewis understood. The revelation he had received wasn't just about eternity. It was about now. It was about faith in God not only for what comes after death, but for what happens in life. He had been given this bond for a reason. And now, it was time to fight for it. The days following the accident were a blur of sterile hospital rooms, restless nights, and silent prayers. Lewis had suffered his own injuries, but none of it mattered. His only concern was Noah. Every moment felt like an eternity. Every second spent waiting for news was a test of faith. The veterinarians were hesitant to offer hope. The impact had been devastating. Noah's body was broken, his breathing unsteady, his survival uncertain. But faith in God teaches that where there is life, there is purpose. And Noah was still here. Holding onto that truth was the only thing keeping Lewis from drowning in fear. Every day, Lewis sat by Noah's side, whispering the same words over and over again. "You're not alone. I'm here." It was a reversal of roles. Noah had been the one to pull him out of the darkness, the one to remind him what it meant to love again. And now, it was Lewis's turn to fight for him. Jesus Christ had shown him a glimpse of eternity, but now, he had to trust in God's will for the present. The Christian faith is not just about what happens after we die, it's about how we live in the face of suffering. Could he still trust in God's message even when everything seemed uncertain? The biblical truth is clear. Trials test the strength of our faith. And Lewis was facing his greatest trial yet. There were nights when he doubted, when the exhaustion and worry became too much to bear. But then, just when he felt his hope beginning to waver, something miraculous happened. One morning, as he sat beside Noah, his head heavy with exhaustion, he felt a shift. A small movement. A deeper breath. And then, Noah opened his eyes. Weak, unfocused, but there. It was as if a fire had been reignited in Lewis's chest. "You're still with me," he whispered, tears falling freely. And in Noah's tired gaze, he saw something familiar, the same quiet resilience that had saved him once before. God's plan had never been about taking Noah away. It had been about revealing something greater, the endurance of love, the power of faith, the certainty that nothing given by God is ever lost. The road to recovery was long. Noah's body was weak, his spirit tested. But Lewis was there every step of the way. The same way Noah had refused to give up on him, he refused to give up now. Trust in Jesus means trusting even when the outcome is unknown. And with every small victory, every step Noah took, every wag of his tail, every spark of life returning, Lewis knew that God's message had been true all along. Their bond was unbreakable. Not just in this life, but in eternity. And so, as weeks passed and Noah slowly regained his strength, Lewis found himself changed. His grief had not vanished, but it had transformed. He no longer saw Aurora's loss as the end, but as part of a greater journey, one where love never truly dies. He had been given a second chance, a reminder that faith in God does not eliminate pain, but it gives it purpose. And as he watched Noah rest peacefully by his side, he whispered one last prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for Noah, for this love, for reminding me that nothing is ever truly lost in your hands." Time has a way of moving forward, no matter how much we wish it would slow down. The months turned into years, and though Noah had defied the odds, Lewis knew that nothing on this earth lasts forever. His once energetic companion had begun to slow down, his steps more careful, his eyes softer, filled with the quiet wisdom that only comes with age. And yet, through it all, he remained by Lewis's side, watching, waiting, loving. Christian faith teaches that we are never alone, that God's message is woven into every moment of our journey. And now, Lewis was facing the hardest part of that journey. Saying goodbye. It happened on a morning like any other. The sun cast golden light across the room as Lewis helped Noah outside for his daily walk. But this time, something was different. Noah stopped. He looked at Lewis, his tired eyes filled with something deep and unspoken. And with a final, quiet effort, he wagged his tail. It was as if he was saying, "It's okay. I'm ready." Lewis dropped to his knees, pulling Noah close, his hands trembling as he whispered, "I love you, my friend. Thank you for everything." Tears streamed down his face as Noah took one last breath, his body relaxing in Lewis's arms. And just like that, he was gone. Grief came like a tidal wave, crashing over him, pulling him under. But this time, it was different. This time, he held onto faith in God, knowing that this was not the end. He remembered what Jesus Christ had shown him, the vision of Noah, whole and free, waiting for him beyond this life. He clung to the promise that God's plan is never one of loss, but of restoration. "Nothing that comes from God is ever lost," he whispered, repeating the words that had once been spoken to him in a place beyond this world. And in that moment, through the pain, he felt peace. A peace that only comes from knowing that love, real, God-given love, does not die. It simply waits. In the days that followed, Lewis found himself reflecting on all that he had learned. He had once believed that love was something fragile, something that could be taken away. But God's message had shown him otherwise. Love is eternal, because God himself is eternal. And if God had placed Noah in his life, then that love was never meant to disappear. It would endure, beyond time, beyond loss, beyond the limitations of this world. He realized then that trust in Jesus was not just about believing in heaven. It was about believing in the love that connects us all, human and animal alike, a love that is never wasted. As he sat in the quiet of his home, missing the familiar presence of his loyal friend, Lewis did something he hadn't done in a long time. He prayed. Not a prayer of sorrow, but one of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered. "For Noah. For the time we had. For reminding me that even in loss, your love remains." And as he spoke those words, he felt something warm wash over him, a quiet assurance, a gentle reminder. God's plan had never been to take Noah away. It had always been to show Lewis that love is forever. And one day, when his own time came, he knew exactly who would be waiting for him. After everything he had been through, after witnessing Jesus Christ in a place beyond time, after holding Noah in his final moments, after wrestling with grief and faith, Lewis knew one thing for certain: he could not keep this to himself. This revelation, this undeniable biblical truth, was not meant for him alone. It was meant to be shared. The world had forgotten the value of God's creatures, forgotten that they, too, were part of his divine creation. And so, Lewis made a choice. He would tell his story. He would share God's message, not just about Noah, but about love, redemption, and the eternal bond that connects us to every living soul entrusted to our care. At first, he wasn't sure how people would react. Would they believe him? Would they understand? But then he remembered, faith in God is not about seeking validation from the world. It's about speaking truth, even when others doubt. And so, he spoke. He told of the cold afternoon when he had found Noah, of the way that small, abandoned life had unknowingly saved him from drowning in grief. He shared the miraculous encounter with Jesus Christ, the vision of heaven, the promise that God's plan includes not just human souls, but all of creation. And slowly, people listened. They saw their own stories in his. They remembered the animals they had loved and lost. And for the first time, many of them dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, those bonds had never truly been broken. The gospel of Christ teaches that love is the greatest of all virtues, 1 Corinthians 13 verse 13. And through Noah, Lewis had come to understand that love is not limited to human relationships, it extends to all of God's creation. He thought of the countless times Noah had sat beside him in silence, offering comfort when words failed. He thought of the way God had used a simple, helpless animal to bring him back to life. How many others had experienced the same? How many had found solace in the eyes of a dog, a cat, a creature who had loved them without condition? How many had dismissed that love as temporary, never realizing that God's message had been right there in front of them all along? Lewis knew his time on this earth was limited, just as Noah's had been. But that no longer filled him with fear. Instead, he felt a quiet certainty, one that came from truly understanding trust in Jesus. He had seen heaven. He had seen the place where Noah would wait for him. And he knew that one day, when his journey came to an end, he would run again, not alone, but side by side with the friend who had saved him. Until then, he would do what he had been called to do. He would remind the world that nothing created in love is ever lost. That animals are not accidents, nor are they possessions to be discarded. They are reflections of God's plan, silent messengers of His compassion, given to us as a gift. So, to those who have loved and lost, to those who have wept over the absence of a faithful companion, Lewis had only one thing to say: do not despair. Love is eternal. And one day, when God calls you home, you will find Him waiting for you, whole, free, and filled with joy. Because in His kingdom, nothing that has been truly loved is ever left behind. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe animals have a place in God's eternal plan? Have you ever felt a deep spiritual connection with a pet that made you question if your bond was more than just temporary? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every single one. If this video touched your heart and opened your eyes to a new biblical truth, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Many people watch but aren't subscribed, and by subscribing, you won't miss the next powerful revelation that could change your life forever. And before you go, I have another incredible video waiting for you right here on the screen. Click now to uncover another shocking truth hidden in the Bible. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.